Close your eyes for a moment and let the modern world, with its frantic humming of electricity and its neon glare, simply dissolve into the mist. You are standing on a narrow, rutted path. The mud is thick and cool against your boots, and the air, the air is different, hey? It smells of damp ice, wood smoke, and the sharp, metallic tang of an approaching winter. You are in the heart of the medieval world, a place where the sun dictates the rhythm of your blood, and the shadows are never just shadows. And there, standing by the low doorway of a timber-framed house, is a woman. You might be tempted to look past her, to search for the clank of a knight's armor or the tall spires of a cathedral. But if you do, you will miss the very person who holds this entire world together with threads of wool and iron will. You see, there is a persistent myth, a comforting, dusty lie we tell ourselves, that the women of this era were merely background characters, fragile creatures tucked away in high towers or bent double in the fields, waiting for history to happen to them. But if you were to actually step into her world, if you were to look into her eyes, clouded by the smoke of 1,000 fires, you would realize quite quickly that you probably couldn't handle her. Her life was not a fairy tale. It was an unrelenting masterclass in survival, a complex dance of law, labor, and unspoken power that would leave a modern soul breathless within an hour. Consider the hearth, the center of her universe. To you, a fire is a cozy luxury, something to be turned on with a switch or enjoyed with a glass of wine. To her, a fire was a living, breathing beast that had to be fed, tended, and respected. If the fire went out, the family went hungry. If the fire grew too bold, the thatched roof became a funeral pyre. She spent her days navigating the heat, her skin perpetually dusted with ash, her hands mapped with the scars of 100 small burns. She was the mistress of the flame, the alchemist of the everyday. She knew how to turn a handful of coarse grain and a few withered leeks into a sustenance that could fuel a man for days plowing. She understood the alchemy of fermentation, the bubbling life of ale, which was the only thing safe to drink when the village well tasted of rot. She was the brewer, the baker, the keeper of the life force. As you walk with her through the village, you notice the weight she carries. It isn't just the heavy wooden buckets of water, though those would make your shoulders ache with a dull, throbbing heat. It is the weight of knowledge. She knows every plant in the hedgerow. She knows which leaf will soothe the crying babe and which root, if steeped too long, will send a man into a sleep from which there is no waking. She is the village's primary healthcare provider, centuries before the word doctor meant anything to the common folk. She is a botanist by necessity, a pharmacist by tradition. While the men are out in the fields, negotiating with the soil and the seasons, she is negotiating with life itself. She delivers the lambs, and she delivers the neighbor's children, her hand steady in the face of the blood and the screaming, for she knows that in this world, life is a fragile, flickering candle, and she is the one shielding the flame. You might think her world was small, confined to the few miles between the church and the mill, but her mind was vast. Imagine the silence of her evenings, no screens, no scrolling, just the rhythmic, hypnotic whirl of the spindle. She spun every inch of thread that would ever touch her family's skin. Every shirt, every cloak, every blanket began as a bundle of raw, greasy wool that she cleaned, carded, and twisted into being. This was a meditation, a constant, repetitive motion that allowed her to weave stories, memories, and prayers into the very fabric of her life. When you look at a medieval tapestry, you aren't just looking at art. You are looking at the physical manifestation of thousands of hours of female thought. And then there is the law, the strange, tangled web of medieval rights that would surprise you. You've been told she was property. Yet here she is in the local court, arguing for her right to a piece of land, or suing a neighbor for a debt of grain. She is a femme soul if she is unmarried or widowed, a legal entity unto herself, managing businesses, signing contracts, and defending her honor with a sharp tongue and a deep understanding of local custom. She is not a victim of her time. She is a navigator of it. She knows how to use the whisper, that informal network of women that stretches from the washpool to the church porch, a network that can make or break a man's reputation faster than any king's decree. But let us move deeper into the forest, where the shadows grow longer and the air turns cold enough to see your breath. See it curling like a ghost in the moonlight. Hey, the medieval woman's power takes on a different hue. This is the realm of the folklore she carries in her bones. She knows the stories of the wild hunt and the hidden folk, not as fairy tales, but as warnings. She lives in a world where the supernatural is as real as the mud on her shoes. She hangs bundles of St. John's wort over the door to keep out the things that bump in the night, and she whispers charms over the butter churn when the cream refuses to tan. This isn't superstition to her. It is a practical application of a world that is far more mysterious and dangerous than ours. She is the guardian of the threshold, the one who stands between the safety of the hearth and the chaos of the wild. Imagine, if you will, the sheer physical endurance required of her. You, who might feel exhausted after a long day at a desk, would find her leisure to be backbreaking labor. When she rests, she is still mending, still preserving, still planning for the lean months of February when the larder is empty and the wind howls through the cracks in the wattle and daub. Her strength is not the explosive strength of the warrior, but the grinding, tectonic strength of the earth. She endures. She endures the loss of children, the cruelty of the weather, and the heavy hand of a feudal system that asks for everything and gives back little. And yet, she laughs. You hear it sometimes, a low, earthy sound echoing in the tavern or across the fields, a laughter that is seasoned with salt and survival. It is the laugh of someone who knows exactly how difficult the world is and has decided to thrive anyway. You wouldn't handle her because she doesn't need your validation. She doesn't need your likes or your follows. She exists in a state of profound connection to the physical world, a connection we have almost entirely lost. She knows the texture of the soil, the temperament of the cows, the exact moment the seasons shift. She is synchronized with the moon and the tides. To step into her shoes would be to experience a sensory overload. The smells would be too strong, the work too hard, the silence too loud. You would miss your distractions, your comforts, your illusions of control. She, however, has no illusions. She knows that the wolf is always at the door, and she has learned exactly how to look it in the eye. As the evening light fades to a bruised purple over the ridge, and the first stars begin to prick through the velvet sky, you see her one last time. She is closing the shutters, the wood groaning under her hand. She looks out at the dark horizon, a small figure in a vast, unforgiving landscape. She is the anchor. She is the reason there is a tomorrow in this village. As we move through this long night together, we will peel back more layers of her life. We will see the queens in their counting houses, the nuns in their stone-cold cloisters, and the peasant girls dancing in the ruins of Roman villas. But for now, just sit with her by the fire. Feel the heat. Smell the smoke. Listen to the silence. It is a long way until morning, and the story has only just begun. You see, the medieval woman wasn't just surviving the Middle Ages. She was defining them. Every time a knight rode off to a glorious, pointless war, it was a woman who ensured there was a farm to return to. Every time a monk wrote a chronicle of kings, it was a woman's labor that provided the parchment, the ink, and the bread on his table. She is the invisible infrastructure of history, and as the embers in the hearth pop and hiss, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls, you begin to realize that the Dark Ages weren't dark because of a lack of knowledge. They were dark because we haven't been looking in the right places. We've been looking at the crowns, when we should have been looking at the hands that wove the velvet they sat upon. The wind picks up now, whistling through the eaves, a lonely, haunting sound that seems to carry the voices of a million forgotten daughters. They aren't asking for your pity. They are asking for your recognition. Can you hear them? Above the crackle of the wood, beneath the beat of your own heart, they are there. They are telling you that the world is older than you think, and harder than you know, and more beautiful than you can imagine. They are telling you that you are made of the same stardust and mud as they were, but that you have forgotten how to walk through the fire. So, stay a while. Let the sleepy historian guide you through the tall grass and the ancient ruins. There is so much more to tell you about the women who couldn't be handled, the ones who broke the rules, the ones who made them, and the ones who simply outlasted them all. The night is deep, the path is long, but we have plenty of time. Let the rhythm of the words be your guide. Slow, steady, like the heartbeat of the world. We are going back to a time of salt and silk, of iron and ivy, where a woman's shadow was the only thing that could truly hold back the dark. And as you drift closer to that place between waking and dreaming, remember the woman by the door. She isn't a ghost. She is an ancestor, and she is waiting for you to finally see her for who she truly was. Not a damsel, not a victim, but a titan, draped in wool, standing in the smoke, watching the stars, and knowing, with a quiet, terrifying certainty, that she is the one who will survive the night. Part 2. The silent architects of the city. Stay here, in that soft space between the firelight and the encroaching dark. The transition from the muddy village path to the cobblestone veins of a medieval city is not a journey of miles, but of sound and scent. Can you hear it? The rhythmic clink-clink of a mason's hammer against limestone. The distant, rhythmic thumping of a fuller's feet on wet wool. The cries of 100 vendors blending into a low, oceanic roar. You are entering the city, a labyrinth of timber, stone, and ambition. And if you think the medieval city was a man's world, a place of guild halls and counting houses where women were merely guests, then you have not been paying attention to the shadows behind the stalls or the ledges in the counting rooms. You see, the city was a different kind of wilderness, and the women who inhabited it were a different kind of survivor. To understand them, you must first understand the guild, that sacred, rigid brotherhood that governed every aspect of trade. But look closer at the records, beneath the official seals and the Latin flourishes. You will find the Silk Women of London and Paris, a powerful, female-only guild that controlled the most delicate and expensive trade in Christendom. They didn't just weave, they imported, they negotiated, and they held the monopoly on the luxury that adorned the necks of kings. You wouldn't handle them because their business acumen was as sharp as the needles they wielded. They managed apprentices, balanced international accounts, and defended their trade secrets with a ferocity that would make a modern CEO blink. Imagine walking through the narrow, overhanging streets where the sun only touches the ground at high noon. You pass the brewery, and the smell hits you. It is sweet, yeasty, and heavy. In the Middle Ages, brewing was a woman's art. The alewife was the pillar of the community. She didn't just make a drink. She made the primary source of nutrition for the working class. If you were a man in this city, your health, your hydration, and your very mood were in her hands. She stewed over the steaming vats, a master of timing and temperature, navigating the complex chemistry of hops and grain. To be a successful alewife required more than a recipe. It required a skin like leather, a voice that could carry over a tavern brawl, and a mind for mathematics that could keep track of 100 different tabs scratched into a wooden board. And then there are the widows. Oh, the widows. In the medieval city, a widow was often the most powerful person on the block. Upon her husband's death, she didn't just inherit a house. She inherited a life. She became the head of the workshop, the master of the craft. You would see her directing the journeymen, training the apprentices, and sitting at the head of the table in the guild hall. She was a femme soul, a woman standing alone, and she stood tall. She had seen the cycle of life and death. She had buried her partners and often her children, and she was left with a clarity of purpose that was terrifyingly efficient. She knew the value of a penny and the weight of a reputation. You wouldn't handle her because she had nothing left to fear, and a woman with nothing to fear is the most formidable force in any century. But let us turn our gaze to the marketplace, the heart of the city's chaos. Here, the regraitresses and the market women were the masters of the flow. They knew the price of wheat in the next county and the cost of fish at the coast. They were the ones who stood in the freezing rain from dawn until dusk, their fingers blue with cold, ensuring that the city didn't starve. They were the masters of the huckster's art, knowing exactly how to talk a customer into a sale while simultaneously keeping an eye out for the city watch. Their lives were a constant negotiation with the law, with the weather, and with the fickle appetites of the urban crowd. They were loud, they were vulgar, and they were essential. As you walk, the city's sounds begin to change. The roar of the market fades, replaced by the rhythmic, somber tolling of a bell. We are approaching the walls of a convent, or perhaps a small stone cell attached to the side of a church. This is the world of the anchoress. You see a small window, the only connection between her and the world. She has been ceremonially buried alive, her funeral rites read while she was still breathing, so that she might devote herself entirely to the divine. You might look at her and see a prisoner, but she saw herself as a voyager. While you are trapped in the physical world, she is traveling the corridors of the infinite. Her mind is a library, her soul a map. Kings and bishops come to her window, whispering their sins and seeking her counsel. She is the silent architect of the city's spirit. You wouldn't handle her because her stillness is more powerful than your movement, and her silence is louder than your shouting. Think of the sensory world of these urban women. The smell of the city was a tapestry of rotten roses, the stench of the tanneries and the open sewers clashing with the incense drifting from the cathedral doors and the lavender kept in a woman's chest. The textures were just as varied. The rough, abrasive touch of unwashed wool, the slick coldness of damp stone, the surprising softness of a child's cheek in a world that felt so hard. A city woman's life was a constant friction, a sharpening of the wit against the stone of urban reality. She was more literate than you might think, often keeping her own accounts or reading the prayer books that were becoming the status symbols of the rising middle class. And what of the girls, the young apprentices and domestic servants who were the gears that kept the great houses turning? They lived in the eaves of the houses, waking before the sun to haul wood and water, their lives defined by the whims of their masters. Yet, they too had their own world, a world of shared secrets in the dark, of songs sung while scrubbing the hearth, of dreams of a dowry that might buy them a small piece of freedom. They were the observers, the ones who saw everything and said nothing. They knew who was sleeping where, who was stealing from the till, and who was crying in the chapel at midnight. Their power was the power of the witness. As the sun begins to set, casting long, skeletal shadows across the timbered jetties of the houses, the city takes on a predatory air. The night walkers emerge, those women who operated in the margins of the law and the light. They were the entertainers, the prostitutes, the tavern dwellers. History often judges them harshly, but they were the ultimate pragmatists. They knew the city's underside better than any magistrate. They navigated a world of violence and desire with a cynical grace, surviving on their wits when all other doors were closed to them. They were the reminder that the medieval world, for all its piety, was a world of flesh and blood. The city woman was an expert in the performance of life. She knew how to dress to signal her status, the specific height of her wimple, the number of buttons on her sleeve, the quality of the fur lining her cloak. Every garment was a statement of power and place. She walked with a specific gait, a way of holding her skirts out of the filth that spoke of her discipline. She was a navigator of social hierarchies that were as complex and dangerous as the winding alleys she called home. You wouldn't handle her because you would trip over the unspoken rules she follows as naturally as breathing. And now, as the city gates groan shut for the night and the curfew bell rings out, the city settles into a restless sleep. The torches are lit, casting a flickering, orange glow on the stone walls. The women of the city are still awake. Some are nursing infants by a dying fire. Some are counting the day's coins by a single candle. And some are staring out of high windows at the moon, wondering if the world beyond the walls is as small as they've been told. They are the builders of the future, the ones who turned the medieval town into the modern world. They are the masters of the ledger and the loom, the keepers of the city's secrets. Sit with them for a moment in the cool evening air. Feel the vibration of the city through the soles of your feet. It is a living thing, and these women are its heartbeat. They aren't waiting for a night to save them. They are too busy running the world to notice is gone. The darkness is thick now, smelling of old stone and guttering candles. But we aren't finished yet. There are more paths to walk, more women to meet, those who lived on the edges of the map, and those who dared to cross them. The night is still young, and the historian's voice is steady. Let the stories carry you deeper, into the forests, into the courts, and into the very heart of the medieval soul. Part 3. The Quill, the Cloister, and the Kingdom of the Mind. Leave the city's roar behind you now. Let the clatter of the marketplace and the smell of the tanneries fade until they are nothing but a memory. We are moving into the silence. But do not mistake this silence for emptiness. We are entering the stone-cold hallways of the abbey and the sun-drenched scriptoriums where the medieval woman fought her most profound battles, not with swords, but with ink, parchment, and the sheer, unadulterated power of her intellect. You are stepping into the kingdom of the mind, a place where a woman's soul was allowed to expand until it touched the very edges of the cosmos. You see, for the medieval woman, the convent was not always a prison or a place of hiding. Often, it was the only space on earth where she could truly be free. Imagine a young girl, perhaps the third or fourth daughter of a minor noble, standing before the heavy oak doors of a nunnery. To you, she is losing the world. To her, she is gaining an empire. Inside those walls, she would learn to read, to write, to sing, and to think. She would be fed. She would be safe from the perils of childbirth, which claimed women like a relentless reaper. And she would be given a voice. You wouldn't handle her because her education would likely dwarf your own. She moved through the complex rhythms of Latin. She understood the movements of the stars, and she debated the nature of the divine with a precision that would leave a modern philosopher reeling. Walk with me into the scriptorium. The air is cool here, smelling of old vellum and the metallic tang of gall ink. You see a woman bent over a desk, her fingers stained black. She is an artist, a chronicler, a preserver of human thought. In an age where a single book cost as much as a small farm, she was the one creating the wealth of the world. She didn't just copy words, she illuminated them. With a brush made of a single squirrel hair and gold leaf so thin it would float away on a sigh, she turned cold theology into a riot of color and light. She painted dragons in the margins and vines that entwined around the capital letters like living things. She was the one who decided how the future would see the past. You see a book. She saw a window into the mind of God. And then there were the abbesses, the titans of the medieval church. Think of a woman like Hildegard of Bingen. She wasn't just a nun. She was a polymath. She wrote music that still haunts us today with its ethereal beauty. She wrote medical texts that categorized the healing properties of every plant in the Rhineland. She wrote accounts of her terrifying, cosmic visions that made popes and emperors tremble. She traveled across Europe, preaching to crowds of men, her voice steady and her conviction unshakable. She managed vast estates, commanded armies of tenants, and stood toe-to-toe with the most powerful men of her age. You wouldn't handle her because she didn't answer to any man on earth. She answered to the light, and when she spoke, the world listened because it had no other choice. But the kingdom of the mind wasn't restricted to the cloisters. Consider the Trotula, the name associated with a group of female physicians in Salerno. While the universities were beginning to close their doors to women, these healers were writing the definitive texts on women's health. They understood the body in a way the male doctors of the time, with their theories of humors and stars, simply couldn't. They dealt with the reality of pain, the complexity of birth, and the secrets of the skin. They were the pioneers of gynecology, operating in a world that often viewed the female body as a mystery or a curse. They treated their patients with a blend of science, tradition, and empathy that was centuries ahead of its time. As we wander deeper into the medieval night, the shadows of the library grow long and flickering. You might feel a chill. That is the presence of the heretics and the beguines. These were women who decided that they didn't need the walls of a convent or the permission of a priest to lead a holy life. They lived in small communities in the heart of the cities, working as weavers or nurses, and dedicating their lives to the poor. They were independent, they were literate, and they were dangerous. They dared to read the Bible in their own language and to interpret it with their own hearts. The church viewed them with a mixture of awe and terror. To be a woman who thinks for herself has always been a revolutionary act, but in the Middle Ages, it was an act of supreme courage. Many of them paid for their thoughts with their lives, standing amidst the hay and the wood of the pyre with a dignity that silenced the executioners. Think of the sensory experience of this intellectual world. The scratch of a quill on dry parchment, a sound like a tiny insect walking across a drum, the weight of a heavy, chain-bound book in your lap, the coldness of the stone floors beneath your feet, even in the height of summer, the way the light from a high, narrow window catches the dust motes, turning the air into a cathedral of gold. These women lived in a world of profound focus. Without the constant chatter of the modern world, their minds became sharp, disciplined, and deep. They memorized entire volumes of poetry. They could recite the lineage of every noble house in Europe. They could navigate the labyrinthine arguments of canon law without a single note. And what of the poets, the troubadours of the south of France? These were the female troubadours, noble women who wrote and performed songs of courtly love. But unlike the men, who wrote of distant, idealized ladies, these women wrote of desire, of betrayal, and of the reality of the heart. They spoke of their own longing and their own agency. "I have been in great distress for a knight for whom I longed," one wrote, her words cutting through the centuries with an honesty that still stings. They were the masters of the tenso, the poetic debate, where they would spar with men in a war of wits, and more often than not, they were the ones who left the field victorious. You wouldn't handle these women because they understood the power of the word. They knew that a story is more than just entertainment. It is a weapon. It is a way to build a world or to tear one down. Christine de Pizan, sitting in her study in the early 15th century, looked at the books written by men that slandered her sex and decided to strike back. She wrote The City of Ladies, an architectural masterpiece of prose where she built a metaphorical fortress to protect the reputation of women. She was a professional writer, a widow who supported her entire family with her pen. She was the first of her kind, a woman who dared to tell the world that its version of history was wrong. As the candle on your desk gutters, sending a final, frantic dance of shadows across the stone walls, you realize that the medieval woman's intellect was a hidden fire. It burned behind the high walls of the abbey, beneath the veils of the mystics, and within the songs of the poets. It was a fire that kept the light of civilization alive during the coldest centuries. These women were the librarians of the human soul. They were the ones who kept the stories, the songs, and the secrets. They were the ones who knew that even if your body is confined to a cell, your mind can wander the stars. Sit here for a moment in the gathering gloom of the library. The air is heavy with the scent of old paper and the weight of 1,000 years of thought. Can you feel them? The women who wrote in the margins of history. They aren't just names in a book. They are the very breath of the past. They are telling you that the greatest strength is not found in the muscle, but in the thought. They are telling you that silence is not absence, but a presence so vast it cannot be measured. The night is growing deeper, and we have miles yet to go, into the courts of power and the blood-soaked fields of honor. But for now, just listen to the scratch of the quill. It is the sound of a woman claiming her place in the universe. Part 4. The Iron Crown and the Velvet Glove. Let the quiet of the library dissolve into the heraldic blare of trumpets and the rhythmic, heavy thud of horses' hooves on sun-baked earth. We are stepping out of the shadows of the cloister and into the blinding, dangerous light of the medieval court. If you have been led to believe that the noble women of this age were merely decorative ornaments, pale flowers waiting to be bartered for land and alliances, then you are about to be disabused of a very grand delusion. We are entering the realm of the Iron Crown and the Velvet Glove, a world where power was a lethal game, and the women played it with a cold-blooded brilliance that would make a modern diplomat shudder. You see, in the medieval hierarchy, a queen or a countess was not just a wife. She was a regent, a diplomat, and frequently, a commander. While the men were away at the crusades or embroiled in border skirmishes, it was the woman who sat upon the high seat. You wouldn't handle her because her authority was absolute. Rooted in a bloodline she would defend to the death. Imagine the lady of the castle, standing upon the battlements as an enemy army crests the horizon. She is not fainting. She is calculating. She knows exactly how many bushels of grain are in the granary, how many gallons of oil are ready to be heated, and exactly which messenger to send through the postern gate to summon her allies. She is the administrative heart of the feudal machine, and her courtly love was often a strategic mask for a razor-sharp political mind. Consider the sensory world of the High Court. It is a place of overwhelming contrast. The air smells of expensive musk, roasted venison, and the metallic tang of polished steel. The textures are a jarring mix of the softest Persian silks and the brutal weight of ermine-lined wool. This was the stage upon which women like Eleanor of Aquitaine performed. She was a woman who was Queen of France and then Queen of England, a woman who went on crusade, who survived imprisonment, and who governed an empire that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Scottish borders. You wouldn't handle her because she possessed a gravity that bent the world to her will. When she moved, the political map of Europe shifted. She wasn't just a participant in history. She was its architect, using her children as chess pieces and her own body as a fortress of sovereignty. But power in the court wasn't always found on a throne. It was found in the chamber, that private, intimate space where the queen and her ladies-in-waiting gathered. To the outside world, they were sewing and singing. In reality, they were a shadow cabinet. They controlled access to the king. They managed the flow of information, and they brokered the marriages that would determine the fate of nations for a century. The velvet glove was the art of soft power, the subtle whisper in a husband's ear, the strategic gift of a jewel, the carefully timed silence. A medieval noblewoman knew that a well-placed rumor was often more effective than 1,000 archers. She lived in a world of constant surveillance, where every gesture was a signal and every word was a contract. As you walk through the great hall, notice the mistress of the household. This was no mere housekeeper. She managed a staff of hundreds, oversaw a budget that could rival a small city's, and ensured that the complex theater of medieval hospitality never faltered. If a guest was insulted by their seating arrangement or the wine was sour, it was a diplomatic failure that could lead to war. The woman of the manor was the master of logistics, a conductor of a grand, chaotic orchestra. She was the one who kept the peace when the men's egos threatened to burn the house down. And what of the women who found themselves on the wrong side of the Iron Crown? The disgraced queens and the political prisoners. Their endurance is perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. Think of the women who spent decades in stone towers, never losing their dignity, never stopping their correspondence, waiting with the patience of a spider for the political winds to change. They understood that time is a woman's greatest ally. You see a cage. They saw a vantage point. Their power didn't come from a sword. It came from their names, their claims, and their refusal to be forgotten. The medieval noblewoman was also a master of the image. Every crown, every veil, every embroidered sleeve was a carefully constructed piece of propaganda. She knew that to rule, one must look like a ruler. She endured hours of painful dressing, her body constricted by heavy fabrics and corsetry of stiffened linen, all to project an aura of divine right. She was a living icon, a bridge between the earthly and the celestial. You wouldn't handle her because her presence was designed to intimidate, to remind you of the vast, unbridgeable chasm between the common and the consecrated. But let us look beneath the silk, to the skin and the bone. These women faced the same brutal realities as the peasant in the field. They faced the terrifying mortality of childbirth, the constant threat of plague, and the heartbreak of losing children to the casual violence of the age. Yet, they were expected to mourn in public with choreographed grace and return to the business of the state by sunset. Their melancholy, so often captured in the poetry of the time, was not a romantic affectation. It was the heavy, cold residue of a life lived under the constant pressure of duty. Imagine the evenings in the solar, the private withdrawing room. The fire is low, and the only light comes from a few flickering beeswax candles. Hey, away from the prying eyes of the court. The masks might slip just an inch. You hear the soft murmur of women talking in their native tongues. For many queens were strangers in strange lands, married off to men whose language they barely spoke. They were the ultimate others, navigating foreign courts with a precarious balance of charm and caution. They were the cultural ambassadors, bringing new music, new recipes, and new ideas across borders. They were the ones who truly internationalized the Middle Ages. You wouldn't handle her because her loyalty was not to a person, but to a dynasty. She was the vessel of the future, the protector of the lineage. She viewed herself as a link in a chain that stretched back to the mists of legend and forward to the end of time. This sense of deep time gave her a perspective that we, in our frantic, short-term world, can barely comprehend. She was playing a game that lasted generations. She planted trees whose shade she would never sit in. She founded cathedrals she would never see finished. As the torches in the hallway banged down to their sockets, casting long, wavering shadows of shields and tapestries against the stone, the court falls into a heavy, watchful sleep. But the queen is still awake. She is reading a letter by the dying light of the fire, her face a mask of impenetrable calm. She is the Iron Crown. She is the velvet glove. She is the one who holds the kingdom together while the world sleeps. She is the reminder that power isn't just taken, it is maintained, minute by agonizing minute, through the sheer force of a woman's will. Sit with her for a moment in the gathering cold of the great hall. The air is still, heavy with the scent of stale wine and old stone. Can you feel the weight of the crown? It isn't made of gold. It is made of responsibility, of sacrifice, and of the terrifying knowledge that one wrong move could destroy everything. She isn't asking for your help. She doesn't need it. She is merely waiting for the dawn, so she can begin the dance all over again. The night is long, and we have much further to travel, into the heat of the desert and the salt of the sea, where women found power in places the maps didn't even show. The story is shifting now. We have seen the hearth, the city, the mind, and the court. But there are those who existed outside all these structures. There are the rebels, the wanderers, and the women who chose the wild over the walled city. Let the rhythm of the historian's voice pull you deeper into the dark, toward the edges of the known world, for that is where the most dangerous stories are hidden. Part 5. The Shield Maiden, the Rani, and the Dust of Empire. Now, let the heavy tapestries of the European courts fall away. Let the smell of damp stone and must dissolve into something sharper, something more vast. We are moving away from the walled garden and the stone cloister, following the sun as it bleeds across the horizon. We are entering the world of the horizons, where the maps grow thin and the legends grow tall. This is the realm of the women who didn't just rule from behind a veil or a velvet curtain, but who stood in the stirrups, felt the hot breath of the warhorse against their palms, and breathed in the acrid scent of dry earth and impending blood. You are entering the world of the warrior, and if you think you could handle her, you have never stood in the path of a storm. Imagine the north. The air is a jagged blade of cold, smelling of salt spray and pine resin. You are standing on a rocky shoreline as a longship grinds against the shingle. Emerging from the mist is a woman whose beauty is not found in softness, but in the terrifying symmetry of a well-balanced axe. This is the Shield Maiden. To the chroniclers of the South, she was a nightmare, a violation of the natural order, but to her people, she was a necessity. In the harsh reality of the Viking Age, where every hand was needed to defend the homestead or claim the future, the boundary between the hearth and the shield was often as thin as a thread of silk. You wouldn't handle her because her spirit is forged in the same fire as the steel she carries. She doesn't seek your protection. She is the protection. Her sensory world is one of iron and ice. She knows the weight of a round shield, the way the wood vibrates when it catches a blow, a shock that travels up her arm and settles in her teeth. She knows the sound of the wind howling through the rigging, a low, mournful cello that sings of the open sea. She spends weeks in an open boat, her skin encrusted with salt, her eyes fixed on the stars. She is a navigator of the physical and the metaphysical, understanding the omens and the flight of a raven as clearly as she understands the tension in a bowstring. When she enters the fray, she is not a woman fighting. She is a force of nature, a Valkyrie made of flesh and bone, proving that death has no gender. But let the cold mist of the north burn away. Feel the air grow heavy, humid, and thick with the scent of jasmine, sandalwood, and the metallic tang of dry heat. We are traveling to the east, to the dusty plains and the marble palaces of India. Hey, the warrior woman wears a different face, but the iron in her soul is the same. Picture a Rani, her silk sari draped with the casual grace of royalty, yet beneath the fabric lies a breastplate of tempered steel. She isn't just a figurehead. She is a military strategist. She knows the terrain of her kingdom like the lines on her own palm. She understands the psychology of her troops and the weaknesses of her enemies. When the gates of the fortress are threatened, she doesn't retreat to the inner chambers. She mounts her elephant, her presence a rallying cry that turns the tide of 1,000 desperate hearts. Imagine a small cottage on the edge of the village, where the cultivated fields surrender to the ancient, untamed woods. The air here smells of damp moss, drying valerian, and the sharp, medicinal tang of crushed wormwood. You see her there, silhouetted against the dim interior of her hut, her fingers stained green and brown from the work of the earth. She is the one you come to when the village priest's prayers go unanswered and the Lord's physician has fled the plague. She is the one who knows that for every ailment of the body, the earth has provided a remedy, if only one has the patience to listen. She is a botanist, a chemist, and a psychologist rolled into one. You see a peasant. She sees a periodic table of living elements. You wouldn't handle her because her knowledge is a direct threat to the status quo. In a world where the church and the rising medical universities wanted to formalize and control the secrets of life and death, she was the rogue element. She understood the doctrine of signatures, that a plant shape or color hinted at its use. The heart-shaped leaf for the blood, the yellow flower for the jaundice. This wasn't superstition. It was a sophisticated system of observation and trial, passed down through generations of women who had no books, but had eyes that truly saw. She was the mistress of the brew, knowing exactly how to extract the essence of a plant without destroying its soul. Her sensory world is one of intense vibration. She feels the shift in the seasons in the marrow of her bones. She knows that a root gathered under a full moon has a different potency than one pulled in the heat of the day. She hears the language of the birds as a weather report and the movement of the wind through the oaks as a warning. Her hands are a map of the natural world, calloused by the spade and softened by the oil she presses from seeds. When she touches a fevered brow, she isn't just checking the temperature. She is reading the rhythm of the life force, looking for the blockage that has caused the disharmony. But there is a shadow here, a melancholy that hangs over her like a low-lying mist. To know the secrets of life is to be viewed with a mixture of desperate need and cold terror. When the harvest fails or a child falls ill, the wise woman is the first person the village looks to, and the first they blame. She lives on a knife edge of social acceptance. One day she is the beloved healer, gifted with eggs and milk for her services. The next, she is the hag whispered about behind closed doors. She carries the weight of this isolation with a grim, quiet dignity. She knows that the same people who beg for her help would light the fire for her stake if the wind changed. You wouldn't handle her because she lives with a level of psychological pressure that would shatter a modern mind. Think of the charms she weaves. These weren't just magic spells. They were the rhythmic, poetic anchors of the medieval world. As she stirred the pot or bound a wound, she would chant. These chants were a way to time her processes, to focus her intent, and to provide the patient with a sense of order in a chaotic world. Under the tongue, the root of the elder; over the heart, the breath of the clover. The words were as much a medicine as the herbs. She was the weaver of stories, the keeper of the community's oral history. She knew who had married whom, who had died in the last great winter, and whose bloodline carried the falling sickness. She was the living archive of the village soul. And what of the midwife? This was the most sacred and dangerous role of all. In a time when birth was the primary cause of death for women, the midwife was the gatekeeper. She entered the birthing room, a space strictly forbidden to men, and took command. She brought the knowledge of the motherwort and the raspberry leaf, but she also brought the strength of the collective female experience. She was the one who whispered the secrets of the body to the young mother, shielding her from the terror of the unknown. She was the one who had to make the impossible choices when things went wrong, her hand steady as she navigated the narrow passage between life and non-being. You wouldn't handle her because she has seen the rawest, most visceral reality of existence, and she hasn't looked away. The sensory details of her magic are grounded and grit-filled. The heat of the steam rising from a decoction of willow bark, the original aspirin, the gritty texture of a poultice made of bread and mold, a precursor to penicillin, the bitter, metallic taste of iron water, the sound of the dry leaves of the forest floor crunching under her feet as she searches for the rare, elusive death cap or the life-giving new. She is a part of the ecosystem, not its master. She respects the balance of nature, knowing that for every gift taken from the woods, a price must be paid in care and stewardship. As the Inquisition begins to stir in the distance, a cold wind blowing out of the cathedrals and the courts, the wise woman becomes a target. Her independence, her knowledge, and her connection to the old ways are seen as a rebellion against the new order. The Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches, begins to turn her healing into heresy and her charms into crimes. Yet, she continues. She moves further into the shadows, passing her knowledge in whispers to her daughters and her granddaughters. She becomes the underground of history, the thread that cannot be broken. You see her one last time as the moon rises high over the trees. She is standing by a stream, washing the stains from her apron. She is old, her back bent by years of stooping over the earth, but her eyes are as bright and sharp as a hawk's. She knows something you don't. She knows that no matter how many books are written or how many stone walls are built, the earth will always have the final say. She knows that as long as there is a fever to be broken or a heart to be stilled, there will be a woman in the shadows who knows how to do it. Sit with her for a moment in the cool, damp evening. The forest is alive with the sounds of the night, the owl's hoot, the rustle of the badger, the low hum of the insects. It is a world of infinite complexity and terrifying beauty, and she is its interpreter. She isn't asking for your belief. She is merely asking you to remember that the world is more than what you can see. The night is deep, and the historian's voice is growing heavy with the weight of the stories yet to come. We have explored the power of the earth, but we must now turn our gaze toward the horizon, toward the women who travel the world, and the women who change the very shape of time. The story is shifting. We have touched the hearth, the city, the mind, the court, the battlefield, and the hedgerow. But there are those who existed in the spaces between these worlds, the travelers, the pilgrims, and the women who sought the new world before the maps even knew it existed. Let the rhythm of the words carry you further into the dark, toward the edges of the medieval soul. Part 7. The dust of the road and the star of the sea. Let the scent of the forest flow and the simmer of the herb pot dissolve into the sharp, stinging spray of the ocean and the dry, relentless wind of the open road. We are leaving the rooted life behind, moving into the world of the wanderer, the seeker, and the merchant adventurer. If you believe the medieval woman was a creature of the interior, a bird in a cage of stone or thatch, then you have not stood upon the docks of Venice or the pilgrim paths of the Camino. We are entering the realm of the dusty-footed, the women who measured their lives in leagues and their fortunes in the stars. You wouldn't handle her because her horizon has no end, and her heart is as restless as the tide. Imagine the great road, a ribbon of mud and stone that stretches from the cold mists of England to the sun-bleached walls of Jerusalem. You see a woman walking there, her skates tucked up into her belt, a steady staff in her hand and a scallop shell pinned to her cloak. She is a pilgrim. To you, a journey is a matter of hours in a pressurized cabin. To her, it is a holy labor that might take years. She walks through heat that blisters the skin and rain that soaks the bone. She sleeps in crowded hospices, listens to the polyglot chatter of a dozen nations, and faces the very real threat of bandits, wolves, and fever. You wouldn't handle her because she has traded the safety of the hearth for the uncertainty of the divine. She is a spiritual athlete, her endurance fueled by a faith so physical it can carry her across continents. Her sensory world is one of constant motion, the rhythmic thud-thud of her staff against the earth, the taste of strange, spiced breads in a Mediterranean port, the smell of 1,000 unwashed bodies in a cathedral square, mingled with the sweet, heavy clouds of frankincense. She knows the feeling of the great silence that falls over a group of travelers at night when the campfire burns low and the only sound is the shifting of the horses. She is a collector of stories, a bridge between cultures. When she returns to her village, if she returns, she brings with her the seeds of change, a new way to weave silk, a new recipe for fever draught, or a tale of a world so vast it makes the local lord's castle look like a toy. But let the road lead us to the water, to the salt-crusted docks where the great galleys groan against their moorings. Hey, the medieval woman found a different kind of freedom. Consider the merchants of the sea. In the archives of the great maritime republics, you find the names of women who owned shares in ships, who financed voyages to the Black Sea, and who managed the complex logistics of international trade while their husbands were lost at sea or trading in distant spice markets. You wouldn't handle her because she understands the language of risk. She knows the price of pepper in Alexandria and the weight of silver in Bruges. She is a navigator of the liquid market, her mind calculating the odds of a storm against the potential of a profit. She is the silent partner in the birth of global capitalism. And then there are the sea women of the North and the Mediterranean. History whispers of female pirates and mariners who dressed as men to escape the constraints of the land. But even more common were the women left behind in the fishing villages, women who were the de facto rulers of their communities for 9 months of the year. They were the ones who processed the catch, negotiated with the merchants, and kept the village alive while the men were chasing the herring or the whale. They were sea wives, their eyes perpetually fixed on the horizon, their ears tuned to the subtle shift in the wind that meant a storm was brewing. They possessed a rugged, salt-cured independence that made them impenetrable to the courtly rules of the inland world. Think of the sensory experience of the medieval traveler, the transition from the damp, heavy air of northern Europe to the dry, aromatic heat of the Levant, the first sight of the Golden Horn at Constantinople, where the dome of the Hagia Sophia seemed to float above the water like a second sun, the feeling of the deck heaving beneath your feet, the world reduced to a circle of blue and the snapping of white canvas. These women lived in a state of constant sensory recalibration. They were the original citizens of the world, realizing long before the cartographers that the earth is a single, interconnected web of paths and currents. There is a specific kind of melancholy in the life of the wanderer, the longing for home that clashes with the longing for the away. You see it in the letters of the noblewomen sent across Europe to marry kings they had never met. They traveled in great, lumbering caravans, carrying their language, their fashions, and their loneliness with them. They were the ultimate displaced persons, creating a home out of a few tapestries and a familiar prayer book in a cold, foreign palace. They were the conduits of culture, the reason a song written in Occitan could be heard in a castle in Prague. You wouldn't handle her because her identity is a mosaic, a complex layering of where she came from and where the road has taken her. And what of the wanderers of the spirit, the mystics who traveled not in body, but in soul? Women like Marjorie Kemp, who traveled to Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago, all while carrying on a loud, weeping, public conversation with the divine. She was a nuisance to the authorities, a puzzle to her neighbors, and a woman of unbreakable will. She refused to stay in the box the world had built for her. She saw the world as a classroom and her life as a pilgrimage toward an ultimate truth. Whether she was walking the dusty roads of Spain or sailing the stormy North Sea, she was the master of her own narrative. As the sun sets over the harbor, painting the masts of the ships in streaks of gold and fire, you see the traveler one last time. She is sitting on a stone bollard, watching the tide come in. Her face is dark from the sun, her hands are rough, and her eyes are tired, but they are also wide. She has seen the things you only dream of. She has seen the great Khan's silk tents and the true cross in the flickering candlelight of the Holy Sepulchre. She knows that the world is too big to be governed by a single set of rules or a single way of being. You see a lost woman. She knows exactly where she is. She is at the center of her own journey. You wouldn't handle her because she has tasted freedom. And once you have tasted the salt of the sea and the dust of the road, the walls of a house feel like a tomb. She is the reminder that the medieval world was not a stagnant pool, but a rushing river, and women were the ones who knew how to swim. Stay here in the cooling evening air of the port. The sound of the water lapping against the stone is a lullaby for the restless. The stars are coming out now, the same stars that guided the Phoenicians, the Vikings, and the Pilgrims. They are the map of the night, and they are telling you that there is always another horizon, always another story. The night is almost over, but we have one final destination, a return to the hearth, but with eyes that have seen the world. We are going back to the beginning, to see how the circle closes, and how the sleepy historian leaves you in the quiet of your own heart. Part 8, the closing circle and the echo in the stone. And so, we come back through the mist, back past the salt-crusted docks and the iron-rimmed wheels of the merchant caravans, back toward the low, flickering amber glow of the cottage window where we first began. The night has grown old, and the stars have made their slow, silent trek across the velvet sky. Yet the air remains thick with the presence of the women we have met. Can you feel them? They are no longer just figures in a dusty chronicle. They have become the very shadows that dance upon your walls. We have seen the queen and the peasant, the mystic and the warrior, the healer and the wanderer. Now, as the dawn prepares its first, faint brushstroke of gray upon the horizon, we must ask ourselves, what remains? What is the ghost that lingers when the historian stops speaking? You wouldn't handle the medieval woman because she lived in a state of the eternal now. She didn't have the luxury of a future tense anxiety or a past tense nostalgia. She lived in the friction of the present moment. Every breath was a victory, every loaf of bread a miracle. Every winter survived a triumph of the spirit over the cold, indifferent earth. As you return to your world of screens and steel, you carry a piece of her grit within you. You see the hearth now not as a chore, but as a sanctuary. You see the city not as a grid, but as a living, breathing organism. You see the mind not as a storage unit, but as a fortress. The medieval woman has remodeled your perception of the world, and that is a power that transcends time. Imagine the final hour before the village wakes. The fire has burned down to a pile of glowing rubies, and the air is at its coldest. The woman we saw at the beginning is still there, but she is different now. She is their ancestress. She is the one who took the raw, brutal materials of the Middle Ages, the plague, the patriarchy, the poverty, and the perpetual war, and she wove them into a tapestry of endurance. She is the reason you are here. Every choice she made, every herb she gathered, every child she protected, and every ledger she balanced was a brick in the foundation of the world you currently inhabit. You wouldn't handle her because her responsibility was for the long term, not for the next quarter. but for the next century. She was planting the seeds of a future she knew she would never see. Her sensory world, in these final moments of our journey, is one of profound peace. The smell of the cold ash, the sound of the first cockcrow in the distance, a lonely, piercing sound that breaks the spell of the night. The feeling of the heavy wool blanket against her skin, a warmth that was earned through 1,000 hours of spinning. She is the master of the quiet power. She doesn't need to shout to be heard. Her presence is carved into the very stone of the cathedrals and written into the DNA of the landscape. She is the silent architect who ensured that even in the darkest ages, the light of human dignity was never fully extinguished. Think of the melancholy we have explored, that gentle, storyteller's sadness that has followed us through these 4 hours. It isn't a sadness of despair. It is a sadness of recognition. It is the realization that while we have gained so much in comfort, we have lost that visceral, electric connection to the pulse of the world. We have lost the knowledge of the hedgerow, the patience of the loom, and the absolute clarity of the pilgrim's path. The medieval woman reminds us that handling life is not about controlling it, but about participating in it with every fiber of your being. She didn't handle her world. She was her world. As the gray light begins to spill over the thatch, revealing the mud of the path and the dew on the meadows, the sleepy historian begins to fade. The voice that has guided you through the courts and the cloisters is becoming a whisper, a sigh in the eaves. But the stories are yours now. They are the amulets you take back into the modern light. When you feel overwhelmed by the frantic pace of your century, remember the Silk Woman of London. When you feel silenced, remember the Abbess of Bingen. When you feel afraid, remember the Shield Maiden of the North. They are your counsel, your hidden army of sisters and mothers who have already walked through the fire and found the other side. The medieval woman was the weaver of time. She took the disparate threads of existence, the joy of a bath, the terror of a siege, the boredom of a long winter, and she made them into a garment that could withstand the centuries. She knew that the iron crown eventually rusts and the velvet glove eventually frays, but the spirit that animates them is eternal. You wouldn't handle her because she is too real for a world that loves illusions. She is the mirror that shows you your own strength, a strength you might have forgotten you possessed. Listen to the final silence. It is no longer an empty silence. It is a populated one. The house is full of the ghosts of the women who couldn't be handled. They are in the kitchen, in the garden, in the study, and in the dreams of the children. They are the whisper in the stone. They are the reminder that history is not something that happened to people. It is something that people made. And women were the primary makers, the ones who worked in the shadows to ensure there was a light for the rest of us to follow. As you drift finally into a deep, restful sleep, or as you step out into your own morning, carry the sleepy historian's last words with you. The Middle Ages were not a dark room. They were a room lit by 1,000 individual candles, each one held by a woman who refused to let it go out. You are the beneficiary of that light. You are the continuation of that story. The circle is closed, the path is ended, and the fire is out. But the warmth remains. You wouldn't handle her, perhaps not, but you can honor her. You can remember her, and in doing so, you might just find that you can handle a little more of your own world than you thought. Sleep now, or wake now. The world of the medieval woman is part of you, and it is a world that never truly ends. It just waits for the next person to come along and listen to the whispers in the dark. Farewell, traveler. The dawn is here.